At my son's birthday, I overheard my ex-wife, "This loser will lose all rights to his child." Guests toasted her plan. I smiled, gave my son his gift. 6 months later in court, when the judge saw my evidence, her face went pale. I never thought I'd be in this position. A divorced dad who only sees his son on weekends, and even then only if I'm lucky. Honestly, I'm not even sure I should be writing here, but after what happened today in court, I just need to get this off my chest. Sorry for any errors. I'm typing this on my phone sitting in my car, still trying to process everything that happened. Let me start at the beginning. 3 years ago, my wife Christina filed for divorce. No signs, no warnings. I just came home after a long day at work, and she was sitting at the kitchen table with papers. "I can't do this anymore, Michael. We'll both be better off apart." I was devastated. Our son Jason had just started first grade. We'd bought a house in a good neighborhood with great schools. I thought we were doing fine. Turns out I was the only one who thought that. The divorce was quick and seemingly civilized. Christina got primary custody of Jason. I got visitation rights on weekends and every second Wednesday. I had to sell our house to pay Christina her share. She and Jason moved into a new townhouse, and I rented an apartment nearby to be close to my son. The first few months after the divorce were tough, but we seemed to find a rhythm. I paid child support on time, never missed a visit with Jason, always returned him home exactly when agreed. I thought we were handling the situation as well as could be expected. But gradually, things started to change. Christina began finding reasons why I couldn't take Jason. He suddenly had weekend plans, or he was sick, or he had special activities that couldn't be missed. The amount of time I spent with my son diminished with each passing month. Every time I brought it up, Christina accused me of trying to control their lives. "Jason has other commitments besides you," she'd say. "If you really cared about his well-being, you'd understand that." I tried talking to her about a more stable schedule, offered mediation, even suggested changing my visitation days to better fit their schedule. She always found a reason to refuse. By the time Jason turned 9, I was seeing him maybe 2 or 3 times a month, usually for a few hours at the mall or park. He was becoming increasingly distant during our visits, constantly checking the time, asking when I'd take him back to Mom. It was killing me slowly, but I tried not to show it. I kept showing up, kept trying to maintain a connection with my son, even as I felt a gap growing between us that I couldn't bridge. Last year, Christina married Greg, a successful realtor with a perfect smile and country club membership. Suddenly Jason started talking about weekends at the golf club, about his new gaming console, and how great it was to have a real dad who's always around. Each word was like a knife to my heart, but I smiled and said I was glad he enjoyed his time with Greg. What else could I do? 3 months ago, Jason turned 10. Christina organized a big party at their country club with entertainers, a huge cake, and a long guest list. I was invited at the last minute. "It would be weird if you didn't show up," she texted the day before the event. I bought Jason a new bicycle, the exact one he'd mentioned during our last visit. I spent my entire bonus on it, wrapped it, tied a bow, even attached balloons to the handlebars. I wanted this gift to be special. When I arrived at the club, the party was in full swing. Kids running around, parents standing in groups talking and watching. Christina was the center of attention, elegant in a new dress, hair and makeup perfect. Greg stood beside her, his hand possessively on her waist. Jason was surrounded by friends, laughing at something the clown had said. He'd grown since our last visit. His hair was shorter than I remembered. When he saw me with the bicycle, his eyes widened with delight, and for a moment I saw the little boy I used to rock to sleep at night. "Is that for me?" he asked, running over. "Happy birthday, buddy," I said, trying to keep my emotions in check. He hugged me, for the first time in months, and ran off to show the bicycle to his friends. Christina approached immediately afterward. "Honey, that's too much. Greg and I already got him a mountain bike. He just didn't want to hurt your feelings." Her voice was sweet, but the words stung. I noticed Greg watching us from across the room, smirking. Several parents near him were looking my way, whispering. "I think a boy can never have too many bikes," I replied, trying to keep my composure. Christina rolled her eyes. Sure. Whatever you say. I spent the rest of the party on the periphery, watching my son have fun with his friends, open gifts, blow out candles on his cake. He was happy. Maybe that's all that mattered. By the end of the party, I felt drained. Parents started taking their children home, and I decided to find Jason to say goodbye. Not seeing him in the main hall, I went to check the corridor leading to the restrooms. As I turned the corner, I heard Christina's voice coming from a small lounge room. The door was ajar, and I could see her inside with a group of women, other moms from the party, I assumed. They were holding champagne glasses and laughing. I was about to announce my presence when I heard my name. Did you see Michael's face when I told him about the other bicycle? Christina giggled. He's always trying to buy Jason's affection with these grand gestures. But he never understood what being a real parent means. The women nodded and murmured words of sympathy. I froze, unable to move. This loser will soon lose all rights to his child. Christina continued, taking a sip of champagne. My lawyer is already preparing lawsuits to terminate his parental rights. My heart stopped. Termination of parental rights? For what? I'd never missed a child support payment, never been in a dangerous situation with Jason, never violated any terms of our divorce agreement. On what grounds? One of the women asked, voicing my silent question. Christina leaned in closer, lowering her voice, but I could still hear. Greg knows Judge Bergman, and let's just say we have documentation of how Michael constantly disrupts scheduled visitations, how he emotionally manipulates Jason, how he creates an unstable environment. But another woman began. It doesn't matter if it's true or not. Christina cut her off. What matters is what we can make the judge believe. Besides, Jason will say whatever I ask him to. He knows who really takes care of him. The guests raised their glasses. To a new chapter, one proposed. To life without ex-husbands holding us back, added another. They clinked glasses, laughing, completely unaware of my presence by the door. I quietly backed away, feeling the room spin around me. Parental rights termination. My son was going to be taken from me on false accusations, and Christina was confident she'd succeed. Somehow I forced myself back to the party. Found Jason, hugged him goodbye, keeping a smile on my face though everything inside me was burning. Thanks for the bike, Dad, he said, and for a moment I saw sincerity in his eyes. Anytime, buddy. See you next weekend. Maybe. He glanced over his shoulder, where Christina had returned to the room. If I don't have other plans. I nodded, as if it didn't break my heart. On the drive home from the birthday party, I couldn't shake Christina's words from my head. She was planning to take my son away from me based on lies, and she was confident she'd succeed. The smugness in her voice, the casual way she discussed destroying my relationship with Jason, it made my blood boil. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction with Christina over the past year. How often she'd canceled my visits with Jason. How she'd always called Jason when he was with me, interrupting our time together. How she'd gradually restricted my access to information about Jason's school, his health, his activities. It was a slow, methodical campaign to push me out of my son's life. And now she was preparing to deliver the final blow. The next morning, I called my attorney. Razan was an experienced family lawyer who had helped me during the divorce. He listened without interrupting as I recounted the conversation I'd overheard. Are you sure you heard correctly? He asked when I finished. Absolutely. She's planning to fabricate evidence to terminate my parental rights. Razan sighed. Unfortunately, this isn't as uncommon as you might think. But you'll need evidence, Michael. Your word against hers won't help, especially if she really does have influence with the judge. What do I do? Document everything. Every text exchange, every phone call, every canceled visit. Request copies of all of Jason's school records. You have a legal right to those as his parent. No judge can deny you that. Record all interactions with Christina if it's legal in your state. And then we wait. We give her enough rope to hang herself. And so began 6 months of the most meticulous documentation of my life. I created a calendar of all scheduled visits with Jason and every cancellation Christina made. I recorded the justifications she gave, from he's sick when I'd later see social media photos of him playing soccer that same day to we have a family event which often turned out to be just shopping with Greg. I recorded all our phone conversations. One-party consent was legal in our state, so I could do this without informing her. And Christina, feeling untouchable, became increasingly blatant in her manipulations. Jason doesn't want to talk to you today, she'd say, though I could hear him in the background asking who was calling. We're changing his school, she announced another time, without consulting me, though our divorce agreement stated such decisions should be made jointly. I learned from Christina's neighbor, a friendly elderly woman who always waved to me when I came to pick up Jason, that Christina had been telling people I was dangerous and unstable. The neighbor didn't believe it. She'd seen me interact with Jason and knew it was lies, and she was willing to provide a written statement that she'd heard these false claims. The hardest part was keeping my cool during every interaction with Christina. Not letting her know I was aware of her plans. Continuing to be polite, punctual, and professional even when she did everything possible to provoke a reaction she could use against me. Worst of all was watching Jason change. He became more distant, less interested in spending time with me. Sometimes he'd repeat phrases that were clearly not his own. Mom says you don't care about my future like Greg does, or Mom says if you really loved me, you wouldn't bother us all the time. Each statement broke my heart, but I just smiled and changed the subject, knowing that arguing about his mother would only widen the gap between us. During one of our rare visits, Jason mentioned casually that he'd been talking to someone about how he felt about me and Mom. A nice lady who asks lots of questions. I realized Christina had him seeing a therapist, probably one who was helping build their case against me. I immediately called Razan. We need to request those records, he said. If she's using a therapist to manipulate Jason, we need to know. Through legal channels, we discovered Christina had indeed been taking Jason to a therapist named Dr. Mercer. But when we requested the records, Dr. Mercer refused, citing patient confidentiality. It took a court order to get access, and what we found was disturbing. The notes showed Christina had essentially coached Dr. Mercer, telling her I was emotionally abusive before Jason ever had his first session. The therapist's notes were full of leading questions and interpretations that matched Christina's narrative perfectly. There wasn't a single direct quote from Jason expressing fear or dislike of me, just the therapist's professional assessment that he showed anxiety related to paternal visitation. Meanwhile, I kept meticulous records of every school event I wasn't informed about, every doctor's appointment I should have known about but didn't, and every extracurricular activity Jason was enrolled in without my knowledge. I also documented all the times I showed up for scheduled visits only to be told Jason was unavailable or not feeling well, 38 canceled visits in 6 months. That's nearly every visitation I was entitled to. The most damning evidence came from recordings of Christina outright admitting she was keeping Jason from me because I feel like it, and telling me that Jason needs to understand that Greg is his real father figure now. Through Razan, I also learned that Christina and Greg had been quietly shopping for therapists until they found one willing to write what they wanted. My attorney managed to track down 2 other child psychologists who had met with Jason once but declined to continue treating him. Both were willing to testify that Christina had explicitly asked them to document that Jason was traumatized by visits with me, despite neither of them observing any such signs. Each night, after compiling the day's documentation, I would look at photos of Jason from when he was younger. His first steps, his first day of school, camping trips we took as a family. In those photos, he looked at me with pure love and trust. Now he could barely meet my eyes during our brief visits. It was soul-crushing, but I had to keep going. If Christina succeeded in terminating my parental rights, I would lose Jason forever. No more birthdays, no more school events, no chance to see him grow into a man. The thought was unbearable. 4 months into my documentation project, Razan called with news. She's making her move, he said. Christina just filed for a modification of the custody agreement. She's requesting full custody and termination of your parental rights based on, get this, consistent neglect, emotional abuse, and creation of an unstable environment. The accusations were laughable but carefully crafted. They claimed I consistently canceled visits, missed important events in Jason's life, and showed disturbing outbursts of anger. The filing even included a psychological assessment of Jason claiming he experienced anxiety after visits with me, though I strongly doubted any legitimate psychologist had conducted such an assessment. This is good, Razan said, surprising me. She's overreaching. These are specific claims we can disprove. We've been building our case precisely for this moment. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out, and as Christina had expected, the case was assigned to Judge Bergman, known for his conservative views on family and tendency to favor mothers in custody matters. But Razin wasn't concerned. The more confident she feels, the more mistakes she'll make, he said. And we'll be ready. The formal notification arrived in a plain white envelope. Petition to modify custody agreement and terminate parental rights. Seeing it in black and white made my stomach turn. Despite knowing it was coming, holding the actual document in my hands made it real in a way that sent chills through me. I immediately called Razin, who asked me to bring the papers to his office. The next day, we sat at his large oak desk reviewing Christina's claims. They were even more outrageous than I'd expected. According to her petition, I had consistently demonstrated a pattern of neglect and emotional manipulation. She claimed I had missed over 40% of my scheduled visitations in the past year, a complete fabrication. She alleged I had explosive anger issues that frightened Jason and created an emotionally destabilizing environment. Most absurdly, she claimed Jason experienced severe anxiety before and after my visits, citing Dr. Mercer's professional assessment. The petition requested immediate suspension of my visitation rights pending the final hearing. This is textbook parental alienation, Razin said, flipping through the pages. She's created a fictional version of you and is now trying to make the legal system validate it. Will the judge believe it? I couldn't keep the worry from my voice. Judge Bergman has a reputation for being traditional in family matters. He tends to favor mothers, Razin admitted. But he also despises being manipulated. If we can prove Christina is lying, he'll turn on her fast. Razin outlined our counter-strategy. We would file our own petition requesting modification of the custody agreement, not just rejecting Christina's claims, but seeking equal shared custody based on her systematic attempts at parental alienation. But our most important move, he said, is requesting a guardian ad litem for Jason. What's that? I asked. An independent attorney appointed by the court to represent Jason's best interests. Someone who isn't on your side or Christina's side, but solely focused on what's best for your son. This sounded exactly like what we needed. An impartial third party who could see through Christina's manipulations. Razin filed our counter-petition the next day, along with a motion for immediate appointment of a guardian ad litem. To our relief, Judge Bergman granted the guardian request despite objections from Christina's attorney. Lawrence Diaz, a respected family law attorney with 20 years of experience, was appointed to represent Jason's interests. Christina was furious. This wasn't part of her plan. She had expected to walk into court with her fabricated evidence, her friendly therapist, and her influence over the judge and walk out with complete control over Jason. Now there was an independent party involved who would actually talk to Jason without her coaching. Lawrence moved quickly. He scheduled separate meetings with me, Christina, and Jason. He would also visit both our homes and speak with people in Jason's life, teachers, neighbors, even Dr. Mercer. Meanwhile, Christina's attorney filed an emergency motion to suspend my visitation rights immediately, claiming Jason was in emotional distress after our visits. This forced an emergency hearing before the main custody trial. The night before this preliminary hearing, I couldn't sleep. The thought of potentially not seeing Jason at all until the main trial was unbearable. But Razin assured me we were prepared. We have one advantage Christina doesn't expect, he told me. She thinks this is just a formality that Judge Bergman will automatically side with her. She hasn't prepared for real opposition. The emergency hearing was tense. Christina took the stand first, tearfully describing how Jason was withdrawn and anxious after spending time with me. She claimed he had nightmares and struggled in school following our visits. Dr. Mercer testified next, backing up Christina's claims with psychological jargon that sounded impressive but said little of substance. She admitted under Razin's cross-examination that she had never actually observed Jason with me and that all her information about our relationship came from Christina. When my turn came, Razin presented our evidence methodically. The calendar showing all my attempted visits and Christina's cancellations. Text messages where she admitted keeping Jason from me simply because she wanted to. School records showing Jason's academic performance actually improved during periods when I had consistent visitation. Most damaging was the testimony of Jason's science teacher, who stated that Jason had specifically mentioned looking forward to a science project he was building with me, directly contradicting Christina's claim that he dreaded our visits. Judge Bergman studied the evidence carefully. I could see him growing increasingly skeptical of Christina's claims. When he made his ruling, it wasn't what either of us expected. I'm denying the motion to suspend Mr. Henderson's visitation rights, he said firmly. Furthermore, until the main hearing, Mr. Henderson's visitation schedule will be strictly enforced. Any cancellations not due to documented medical emergencies will be considered contempt of court. I nearly collapsed with relief. Not only had the judge refused to cut me off from Jason, he'd essentially put Christina on notice that her interference with my visitation rights would no longer be tolerated. As we left the courtroom, I saw Christina huddled with her attorney, her face a mask of disbelief and anger. She had expected an easy victory and instead had been put on notice by the judge. Lawrence, the guardian ad litem, approached me in the hallway. "I'd like to schedule a time to observe you and Jason together," he said. "And I'd appreciate copies of all the documentation you presented today." Razin nodded approvingly as we walked to the parking lot. "This went better than expected," he said. "But the real battle is still ahead. Christina won't give up easily." He was right. That evening, I received a text from Christina informing me that Jason was suddenly ill and wouldn't be available for our scheduled weekend visit. When I requested medical documentation as required by the judge's new order, she went silent. The battle for my son had truly begun. The 3 weeks leading up to the main custody hearing were a roller coaster. Despite the judge's warning, Christina found creative ways to interfere with my time with Jason. He was suddenly enrolled in weekend activities that couldn't be missed. He developed mysterious illnesses that disappeared as soon as my visitation time ended. Each incident was meticulously documented and added to our growing evidence file. Lawrence, Jason's guardian ad litem, was thorough in his investigation. He observed Jason with both Christina and me on separate occasions. He interviewed Jason's teachers, Dr. Mercer, and even several of Christina's friends. Most importantly, he spent time with Jason alone, giving my son a safe space to express his true feelings without either parent's influence. The morning of the hearing arrived foggy and gray. I'd barely slept, rehearsing potential scenarios in my mind all night. Razin and I had prepared extensively, organizing our evidence, preparing our testimony, anticipating Christina's tactics. Still, knowing that my relationship with my son hung in the balance made my stomach churn with anxiety. I arrived at the courthouse early, dressed in my best suit. The building's imposing stone facade matched my mood, solemn and heavy with the weight of what was to come. Razin met me at the entrance, his briefcase bulging with our documentation. "Remember," he said quietly as we walked to the courtroom, "stay calm no matter what Christina or her attorney says. Judge Bergman will be watching your reactions closely." The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined, with dark wood paneling and uncomfortable benches. Christina was already there with Greg and her attorney, an imposing woman in an expensive suit. Christina looked immaculate as always, dressed conservatively in navy blue, her hair pulled back in a neat bun. She deliberately avoided my gaze. Judge Bergman entered promptly at 9 a.m., his expression unreadable as he took his seat. The clerk called the case, and the battle for my son's future began. Christina's attorney presented their case first. She painted me as a neglectful father who prioritized his own needs over Jason's. Christina took the stand, alternating between tearful vulnerability and stoic strength as she described fabricated incidents of my erratic behavior and emotional manipulation of Jason. Greg testified next, describing how he'd stepped up to be a father figure because I was consistently absent. He claimed Jason looked to him for guidance and stability, implying I was an unwelcome disruption to their perfect family unit. Dr. Mercer's testimony was particularly frustrating as she spoke with professional authority about Jason's supposed anxiety related to my visits, despite having never observed us together. Her clinical terminology lent an air of legitimacy to Christina's lies. Throughout their testimony, I maintained a calm demeanor, though inside I was seething at the blatant falsehoods being presented as fact. I noticed Judge Bergman watching me closely, gauging my reactions. Finally, it was our turn. Razin began methodically dismantling Christina's narrative. He presented our calendar of canceled visits, complete with Christina's text messages showing her flimsy excuses. He played selected recordings of phone calls where Christina openly admitted to interfering with my relationship with Jason. When I took the stand, Razin guided me through my testimony carefully. I described my consistent efforts to be part of Jason's life despite the obstacles Christina created. I explained how I'd maintained a calm and positive attitude with Jason, never speaking negatively about his mother despite her actions. "Mr. Henderson," Razin asked, "have you ever heard Christina discuss her plans regarding your parental rights?" "Yes," I replied steadily. At Jason's 10th birthday party, I accidentally overheard her telling her friends that she was planning to terminate my parental rights using fabricated evidence. Christina gasped audibly. Her attorney immediately objected, claiming my statement was hearsay and unsubstantiated. Your Honor, Razin responded, we have evidence to support Mr. Henderson's claim. Judge Bergman leaned forward. What evidence? Razin played the audio recording I'd made at the birthday party. Christina's voice filled the courtroom. This loser will soon lose all rights to his child. My lawyer is already preparing lawsuits to terminate his parental rights. The recording continued, revealing her entire plan, manipulating Jason, using her influence with the judge, fabricating evidence. When it ended, the courtroom fell silent. I looked at Christina. Her face had gone completely pale. Her hands visibly trembled as she clutched a water glass. Greg looked as if he'd been punched in the stomach. Judge Bergman stared at Christina with an expression that was difficult to decipher, a mixture of disappointment and anger. Mrs. Werner, would you like to comment on this recording? Christina looked utterly shocked. I didn't. That's taken out of context, Your Honor. Her attorney desperately tried to salvage the situation, arguing the recording was illegal, that it proved nothing specific, that it was just conversation with friends that shouldn't be taken literally. But her attempts were futile. Razin methodically presented evidence after evidence. The systematic pattern of Christina's behavior designed to cut me out of Jason's life. Then Lawrence, the guardian ad litem, presented his report. His findings were devastating for Christina. After thorough investigation, I found substantial evidence that Mrs. Werner systematically interfered with the relationship between Mr. Henderson and their son Jason. He began. Jason, when speaking with me privately, expressed a desire to spend more time with his father. He stated that often his plans with his father were canceled by his mother at the last minute, causing him frustration. Lawrence continued with his recommendation. Based on all evidence gathered, including documents provided by Mr. Henderson, interviews with all relevant parties, and my independent assessment, I recommend the court deny Mrs. Werner's petition to restrict Mr. Henderson's parental rights. Furthermore, I recommend revising the current custody agreement to provide Mr. Henderson with more time with his son, and possibly even shared custody. Judge Bergman listened attentively, his expression growing increasingly stern as he looked at Christina. When all testimony concluded, he announced he needed time to consider the evidence and retired to his chambers, leaving us in tense anticipation. 45 minutes later, he returned, his face serious as he took his seat. Having considered all evidence presented today, Judge Bergman began, I find Mrs. Werner's petition to restrict Mr. Henderson's parental rights completely unsubstantiated. Moreover, I am concerned by evidence of systematic parental alienation on Mrs. Werner's part. I felt the tension I'd been holding for months slowly beginning to release. The judge continued, his voice growing increasingly stern. This pattern of behavior not only violates our previous custody order, but causes significant emotional harm to the child. In light of this, I am not only denying Mrs. Werner's petition but granting Mr. Henderson's counterpetition. Judge Bergman looked directly at Christina, his expression hard. From this day forward, Mr. Henderson and Mrs. Werner will share joint custody of Jason, with equal parenting time. Additionally, any further attempts to interfere with Mr. Henderson's time with his son will be considered contempt of court, with appropriate consequences. He outlined specific conditions. Weekly sessions with a family counselor for all of us, including Jason, for at least 6 months. A clear visitation schedule that couldn't be altered without documented consent from both parties. And a requirement that Christina provide me with full access to all information about Jason's school, medical, extracurricular. As a final blow, Judge Bergman added, lastly, I am referring the transcript of these proceedings to the Bar Association for review of Mrs. Werner's attorney's conduct. Fabrication of evidence and false statements to the court are serious violations. As the judge concluded his ruling, I glanced at Christina. She sat completely still, her face a mask of shock. Greg was already on his phone, probably calling his own attorney. Leaving the courtroom, Razin shook my hand. You did everything right, Michael, he said quietly. You documented, you were patient, you didn't take the bait. That's why you won. Not just a legal victory, but a moral one. I never saw how Christina left the courthouse. I assume she slipped out through a side exit, avoiding any chance of encountering me. The first week of the new arrangement was challenging. Jason transitioned between two homes, clearly feeling the effects of the emotional manipulation he'd been subjected to for years. Our first session with the family counselor was tense, with Christina barely speaking a word and Jason obviously uncertain how to behave. But gradually, very gradually, changes began. Without Christina and Greg's constant negative influence, Jason started to relax around me. We began to rediscover each other. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. By the third month of our new arrangement, Jason started opening up to me. One evening, as we played video games in my apartment, I'd finally been able to move to a larger one, with a real bedroom for him. He suddenly put down his controller. "Dad," he said quietly. "I'm sorry." "For what, buddy?" I paused the game. "For being so, I don't know. I thought you didn't care about me. Mom and Greg always said." "Hey," I gently interrupted him. "You have nothing to apologize for. Adults complicated things and you got caught in the middle. That's not your fault." He looked at his hands. "But I knew some things they said about you weren't true. And I believed them anyway." I hugged him, feeling him lean into me, really lean in, without the wariness that had been there before. "That's okay," I said. "What matters is we're here now. And I'm not going anywhere." As the joint counseling continued, Christina slowly began to understand the damage she'd done, not just to me, but to Jason. One day, during a handover of Jason, she did something unexpected. She apologized. Not for everything and not fully acknowledging all she'd done, but it was a start. "I wanted him to be just mine," she said quietly. "And I convinced myself it was for his good. I know that was wrong. It didn't fix everything, and we're still far from being one big happy family." Greg virtually disappeared from Jason's life after the court case. His interest in the father role seemed to vanish once it ceased being Christina's manipulation tool. I can't say I'm sorry about that. 6 months later, on Jason's 11th birthday, we held a modest party in the local park. Nothing extravagant, just a picnic with a few of his friends, outdoor games, cake. Christina came alone, subdued and restrained, but present. When Jason opened his gifts, he came to mine. Another bicycle, his old one was getting too small. He smiled at me, a real, genuine smile. "Thanks, Dad," he said, hugging me without hesitation, without looking back at his mother, without any shame about showing love for me. In that moment, watching my son enjoy a simple gift, enjoying having both parents at his birthday without tension or manipulation, I felt that all the months of documentation, all the stressful meetings, all the sleepless nights, it had all been worth it. Later, when Jason went to play with his friends, Christina came and sat beside me. We watched our son in comfortable silence that would have seemed impossible a year ago. "He's happier now," she said finally. "When he's with you, I can see that." I nodded, not knowing what to say. "I don't know if I'll ever fully accept it," she continued, "but I'm trying. For him." We sat side by side, two imperfect parents watching our son play in the sunshine, free from the weight of our past conflict. This wasn't a Hollywood happy ending. There were still many challenging days ahead, many moments of tension and disagreement. But it was a moment of quiet victory. Not because I had won against Christina, but because Jason was no longer a pawn in a game. He was just a boy who could love both his parents without guilt or fear. As I sit here typing this on my phone in the car outside my home, I feel something I haven't felt in a long time: hope. Not just for improvement in my relationship with my son, but for healing of all the emotional wounds we inflicted on him with our conflict. 6 months ago, when I stood in that hallway listening to my ex-wife boast about how she was going to permanently take my son away from me, I thought I had lost everything. Today I know that sometimes you need to stay silent, gather evidence, and believe that truth will eventually prevail. And it did. Not perfectly, not like in the movies, but enough that my son has started calling me Dad again with love in his voice. And to me, that's worth the world.